Welcome to the debut episode of the Platinum Review, my other video game review series produced in partnership with the Critical Analysis, the original review series that I began in the summer of 2020. Today, we kick off a series of reviews that focus less on the story, impact, enjoyability, and performance of a game, and instead more on the way the gameplay and certain technical elements of the game hold up in a full Platinum Trophy playthrough, which is usually the same as a 100% playthrough with some variation. Back when I came up with the concept of the Platinum Review, I was initially considering making the first video on BioShock, since it was at the time one of the games I had completed and one I had already covered on a Critical Analysis, purposely leaving out the section on trophy hunting because I wanted it to cover it at some point here. But then the issue of my hiatus from YouTube arose and I had platinumed multiple additional games in that time. And keep in mind that this is not an attempt to be like The Completionist, a show that I greatly respect and love to watch. The Platinum Review is not meant to recommend to you how much of any particular game you should play based on my experience doing every last little thing possible within. Instead, the point of this show is to determine how much I personally believe a game's quality or enjoyment holds up when chasing after the Platinum Trophy specifically. Sometimes this requires a 100% run. Sometimes it requires multiple playthroughs, but occasionally it doesn't require a full 100%. Heck, every once in a while the trophy hunting is more about doing a bunch of wacky things that most people wouldn't even think about doing unless they are exceptionally good at thinking outside the box, which is not something that I excel at. So in the process of preparing for and revitalizing the idea of this series, I wasn't sure where to start with it because some games are small enough for just a Platinum Review, some games have a small enough 100% requirement for just a Critical Analysis that includes a portion on trophy hunting, and still more games that are so big that they require an episode of both series to get the coverage that they deserve. In this case, Astro's Playroom absolutely does not need a Critical Analysis because I can cover all the stuff comfortably in the scope of this video. So I figured what better way to start off the Platinum Review series and celebrate acquiring a PS5 in September 2021 straight from retail, no scalpers involved, than by covering the first game that I played and platinumed on the console. As you may know, Astro's Playroom was marketed as and is widely regarded as a simple tech demo for the PS5 and more specifically the DualSense controller. I'm sure this has been said a million times before, but I have to say that this shocked me. When I played Astro's Playroom in September, I had actually been away from gaming in general for a few weeks, so the stark contrast in how the DualSense felt compared to the DualShock 4 made an even bigger impression than I was already expecting. The most obvious point is in regards to controller vibration. This is so sensitive, and honestly very cool. I have yet to play a PS5 specific game outside from Astro's Playroom where the specificity of the vibration qualities are cranked up to 11 the way this one is, but the difference between the PS4 and PS5 controller is astounding. The single best way to explain how good the vibration is to provide specific examples in-game. The sensors are so subtly accurate that just walking on different terrain, whether it be a metal plate, grass, or even sand, or swimming, there is a distinct change in the input from the controller. In the case of metal, it's a set of separately identifiable taps with each step. In the case of grass, it's a softer continuum as the bot wades through the blades. The vibration of the DualSense controller also flows seamlessly into additional aspects of the controller and gameplay. The punch of inputs in the rockets, hopping around, flying, ice skating, being a freaking robot monkey, and so much more. Everything just sat so well with me. Aside from the controller vibration, the most highly praised and acknowledged bit of hardware are the triggers. These, when not in effect, are no different than any other triggers, although perhaps the most comfortable since the Xbox 360, but when they are utilized and designed, they feel unbelievable. They're beyond responsive, and the way Astro's Playroom incorporates resistance is rather jaw-dropping. Take, for example, the freaking robot monkey. These courses contain multiple types of obstacles, perhaps the most memorable of them being the rock climbing S-sections. These are the best examples of what the triggers do. Pull too hard on them, the climbing stones break. The key is to be ginger about it. But here's the thing, it's not just about the sensitivity of the input. it's the feel of the output as well. You can feel the resistance increase as well as the sharp relief of pressure when the stone breaks and your grip is lost. Trigger-based game mechanics like this in the past have always been either incredibly simple or relatively dodgy, in the sense that if they require particular input, it's a guessing game to make it work. Here you know exactly where you're at and how much room to breathe you have before the stone breaks, even if it's not that much. All in all, it's really satisfying, and although not many games have utilized this resistance to the full extent that they could, even the subtle usage of it in most PS5 upgrades of PS4 games is amazing. The gameplay overall is pretty simple, but there's a ton of variety in what you do throughout the playtime for the purpose of showing off what the PS5 is capable of. Astro's Playroom acts as a sort of tour through the separate components of PlayStation 5 hardware, with the SSD Speedway representing the console's storage, Memory Meadow, I believe, representing the console's RAM/temporary storage, GPU Jungle representing the graphics processor, Cooling Springs representing the fans and cooling systems, and finally the CPU Plaza, the main hub that connects to everything else. In addition, there are a couple more settings and locations that we will talk about a little bit later, but for now let's stick to these 5. The SSD Speedway follows a red and black color scheme, modeling itself after the circle button on the controller. It uses visuals that feel reminiscent to a storage device, giving the vibe of speed and swiftness, just the way that the SSD acts, and also has settings in space. The common theme of music being an absolute bop starts here. Your machine in this level is a rocket ship, I guess, and it was rather enjoyable to play. It's primarily a couple 2D sections with this that give an idea of what the resistance feedback of the controller triggers tell you. Memory Meadow is a much more laid-back area using more light-hearted colors compared to the SSD Speedway, primarily the pink of the square button, and lots of fluffy clouds, although not all of them are too kind. Either way, the music also aids the experience in helping you feel relaxed and laid back. Your machine in this section is a ball that you control with the touchpad. Probably the messiest controlling parts of the game are in these sections, but ramming into enemies and speedrunning precarious ramps is super fun. Probably the most memorable course, the GPU Jungle uses a primarily earthy green and brown color scheme modeled after the triangle button. The GPU Jungle contains some of the most fun and engaging platforming and combat sections in the game, despite probably the least catchy music in my opinion, though that's not to say it's bad because it's all a bop. But what really shines here is the freaking robot monkey. Enough said. Open world sandy beaches, seas, frozen wastelands, and the aesthetic of blue modeled after the X button, this may have been my favorite of the sections overall. Nothing much to say to be honest, it's just a relaxing vibe, and who ain't cool with that? The machine in this level is, I guess, a frog? Probably the least memorable and most mediocre to be honest. And then finally, there's the CPU Plaza, the main hub area. Relatively plain and laid back despite an ungodly amount of other Astrobots, there's not a whole lot happening here, except that it connects to everything else, including the next final section, the 1994 throwback. The ultimate finale to the game, the 1994 throwback is a boss challenge where you play against a T-Rex, which is really cool. This is genuinely one of the best parts of the game, because it came so unexpectedly. I didn't know this was part of the experience, so it was quite the joy to discover. A very respectable boss fight despite PS1 design and downgrading, which was super charming. I had a great time, especially once I beat the dino and he came back in full PS5 enhanced glory for an even more complicated match that was more engaging and very memorable. The second challenge isn't hard, but definitely the hardest part of the game as a whole. It was nice to feel genuinely challenged. I mean, previous levels had a few decent challenges to them related to their design, but I must say how fun this was. Simple, but effective. So with most of that basic analysis over, what's it like to actually complete Astro's Playroom? Fortunately, unlike many games I've completed in the past few years, this section isn't any kind of mixed bag. There's basically nothing about the completion requirements that feel out of touch with the essence of the game, and nothing is drawn out, overly difficult or annoying, or too much to ask for. There are two primary types of collectibles in Astro's Playroom. First, there are artifacts, which I believe every level has 2 of, and then there are puzzle pieces, which I believe every level, including the CPU Plaza, has 4 of, although I think a few of the levels may vary from this slightly. And it's at this point that I must admit a mistake. I lied, there is one final area connected to the CPU Plaza, but it wasn't really important to mention until now. That area is the PlayStation Labo. All 4 of the main gameplay areas, the SSD Speedway, Memory Meadow, the GPU Jungle, and Cooling Springs, are all associated with a certain area of the PlayStation history, and all of the artifacts that you collect throughout your playthrough come here into the PlayStation Labo. All pieces of hardware from previous generations of PlayStation consoles. As somebody who has only played on the PS4 and PS5 by this point in my life, it was high-key really cool to see some of the history of the PlayStation that I was too young and too sheltered to experience for myself as a kid. Also in the Labo are a couple murals on the walls that are formed by all of the puzzle pieces you collect. But you may notice that the murals aren't complete when you collect all of the pieces from the main game areas, and that there's a few gaps on the floor of artifacts, just empty space waiting to be filled. That's because there's this fancy gadget back here. You spend 100 coins to pick out items. Sometimes you get empty tin cans, and that's sad, but the rest of the time you get additional artifacts and puzzle pieces. All it requires is, I think it's 6,000 coins to go through everything. For me, this required maybe an extra 10 or 15 minutes of farming for coins to make sure I could get everything, but that was literally all that the extra completion requirements entailed. What this means is that you will spend a combined 6 or so hours to complete each of the areas and another half hour or so doing the 1994 throwback and all remaining cleanup. Quick and easy. So, we all know about how hard it has been and still is to obtain a PlayStation 5 at this point in time, even approaching a year and a half later. It gets increasingly difficult to hold out and take any opportunities to possibly get one while resisting the urge to give in to scalpers. Trust me, I know all about this too. Occasionally, when I turn on my PS5, I still think about how frankly lucky I was to get a hold of it through PlayStation Direct by private email invite, let alone a public drop. After seriously attempting to obtain the console for the better part of a year, it was by no means easy and was more luck than anything. As time goes on, I continue to hope that more and more people can more easily get their hands on a PS5 console, or even the Xbox Series X if that's your jam, as more of them are being produced and more restrictions are placed to make it harder for scalpers to hoard them all. But on the day that you do manage to strike gold and get your hands on one of these, my recommendation is to check out Astro's Playroom, and even complete it. It is free and comes stock with the console. For a simply slick 6 hours to 100% or less if you don't care to 100%, the experience is absolutely worth it to get a good look at the visuals on display and especially the capabilities of the controller. When it comes right down to it, the point of this game is to be the first thing you play on the PS5 out of the box, show off the PS5, and then never be touched again. That's the point. And on the plus side, if you're a completionist, it's also a really simple and easy platinum trophy. So, on the merit of what is displayed, I fully recommend that you don't skip this game. There's so little on the line, and if you're already watching this video, you clearly do have some interest in Astro's Playroom. If you couldn't care less, you wouldn't be listening to me right now. So what are you waiting for? Enter the next generation of gaming the right way with Astro's Playroom on the PlayStation 5.